In May of 1982, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, and then on June 11th, it opened nationwide. It took the #1 spot with 11 million and held on to that spot for the next 6 weeks. E.T. then fluctuated between first place or second place every single week until October. And then it went back to #1 over the holidays because Universal had pushed it as being a great family film to see over Christmas, and they had even gone so far as to add extra prints to the theaters. Listen to these stats. In its second weekend of release, E.T. recorded the highest grossing second weekend of all time, and then in its fourth weekend of release, it recorded the single highest weekend of all time. E.T. held the record for having 8 weekends where it grossed over 10 million on each of those 8 weekends, a feat that was not matched for almost a decade until Home Alone came out. E.T. was the #1 film in the country for 16 weeks, a record that stands to this day. The year after it came out, E.T. surpassed Star Wars to become the highest grossing film of all time. The film was ubiquitous in pop culture. There was an official fan club.
My kids are wild about E.T. Now there's a whole collection of E.T. toys.
15 million E.T. dolls were sold before September, and it was the best-selling toy that holiday season. For years, E.T. was everywhere. In theaters, on lunchboxes, in pop culture conversations, E.T. was everywhere. Everywhere except the video store. In a time period where most movies were released on home video within a year, E.T. took over 6 times as long, and for most of the 80s, it looked like E.T. would never ever be shown in anyone's home. There were a lot of reasons for this. In fact, it's a pretty tangled mess, and its eventual release on home video is a fascinating study in corporate paranoia that I can't wait to dig into. So grab your Reese's Pieces, power up your speak and spell, because it's time to phone home. Ah, the story of the lonely alien and the boy who befriends him charmed audiences immediately in 1982. And if you see footage of E.T. in theaters, by today's standards, it looks almost fake. People were wrapped around the block. There were lawn chairs in the street. There was a company that would literally rent you a lawn chair for 25 cents an hour while you waited in line. Ice cream trucks would pull up next to the movie theaters and sell ice cream to people waiting all day. And that wasn't just opening night hype. That was a Tuesday. And the reason was simple. Movie theaters operated completely different back then. Most towns didn't have a megaplex. You had one screen in your town, maybe 2 if you were lucky. All right, let me bore you with a little bit of math. In 1982, there were about 18,000 movie theater screens across the United States. You had about 3,000 plus drive-in screens, and the rest were indoor normal theater screens. Today, there's over 41,000 in the United States. So that's more than double the amount of screens that E.T. could show on. But when E.T. opened in 1982, it opened wide, and it was a pretty big wide release, at 1,100 screens. Now, to compare that to a modern film, Wicked for Good opened on over 4,000 screens, which meant in 1982, when the demand would spike for a movie like E.T. or Raiders of the Lost Ark or Return of the Jedi, the system just couldn't handle it. Today, if the show you want to go see sells out, you look on your app, you find another one you can go to in about 15 minutes. But back then, the ticket systems weren't even set up to sell you a ticket for later that night, let alone later that week. You could buy a ticket for the very next show. If you wanted to see the show after that, you had to wait at the theater to buy that ticket. You got there for the 1 o'clock show, it was sold out, you'd stand out there till 3:30. And the waiting is what mattered, because people would see that line and think, if people are lined up to see E.T., it must be worth seeing. That's why it felt bigger than almost anything that came after it. And one of the things that was happening right around the time E.T. was in theaters was a brand new technology, the VCR.
Now you can buy full-length uncut movies on cassettes.
You can enjoy these and many other great movies.
In the early 80s, studios were worried about home video. They worried that VCRs would affect ticket sales and undermine their television rights and just make their movies feel less special. Movies were expected to show in theaters first, then show up on television, then eventually show up in a syndicated package, but home ownership wasn't part of the equation. Home video existed, but it was treated cautiously. Tapes were expensive, rental pricing was high, and studios moved slowly and selectively. But in every other case, the movie would eventually come home on VHS, and you could purchase the tape and watch it forever, for every movie except E.T. Now, to see how unusual E.T.'s delay was, I want to tell you about some of the other hit films of the era and when they came on home video. Raiders of the Lost Ark had its theatrical debut on June 12, 1981. It got its first VHS release on December 1st, 1983. Superman 2 theatrical was in June of 1981, and by late 1981, it was already on home video. Rocky III came out in theaters in May of 1982, and it showed up on home video in 1983. Poltergeist, also 1982, and then appeared on home video by the end of 1982. By 1986, all of those hits were on home video. They were all at your video store, except for E.T. I saw E.T. in the theater as a little boy, and then I saw it again a year later at my cousin's house. But it wasn't on an official VHS. It was a bootleg copy. Camcorders started being released by Sony in the mid-70s, and by the 80s, they were small enough that you could theoretically smuggle one into a movie theater. I don't think it'd be easy, but you could do it. Now, this bootleg movie I saw was pretty bad. The camera couldn't really sync up with the screen, so the whole thing kind of flickered for most of the movie, and then occasionally it would just go out of focus, and sometimes you would hear the guy move around in his seat, and the rustling of that would shake the microphone and shake the camera, and then you couldn't see or hear anything. But we were watching E.T. at home. These tapes were often traded or sold. Sometimes they would be out in the open, like at a flea market, but generally the way you got these was because you knew somebody. You knew that the liquor store down the street, if you asked for Vinny, Vinny would pull some out of the back and show them to you and sell them to you for cash. Now, I said E.T. rolled out for a wide release in the United States very quickly, which was somewhat unusual at the time. A lot of movies back then would show up first in big cities and then slowly roll out to the whole country. But E.T. rolled out to most of the US all at once, but it didn't roll out overseas all at once. And so in London, for example, it was being seen by people that bought illegal copies in pubs long before it even showed in any theaters. Unfortunately, those tapes are really hard to find today because once people got the movie on home video, they kind of just threw those away. What was the point of keeping them? But the few times I've been able to find some, they're fantastic to look at. I would love to see a bootleg copy of E.T. today, to hear an audience back in 1982 reacting to E.T., saying these lines that we've all heard for decades, that are part of pop culture, when they were still fresh, new, and surprising. And also the historical significance of the fact that for years, that was the only way you could own E.T. on video cassette. Spielberg was the main holdup, though. He really didn't want this released on home video. It was released a couple times in theaters after its original debut, and audiences still loved it. They still kept buying tickets. But by 1988, he felt it was finally time to put this thing out on home video. And so it was released in October. They had a commercial to promote it, but they had to hire another kid to play Elliot because Henry Thomas was old enough to drive a car at this point.
Pepsi-Cola is pleased to announce that E.T. has come home on video cassette.
Pepsi had a deal to promote the VHS, which was interesting because Coca-Cola's the product that's featured within the movie.
Coke. See, we drink it.
Also, Pepsi had two different commercials where they, without paying for any licensing, had implied that E.T. liked Pepsi. There was one where there was a little girl and she was talking about the alien that lived in her house, and she looked a lot like Gertie. Then there's another one with a boy and his dog seeing a spaceship. Now, when the tape came out, it looked different than any other tape. It had green spools and a green gate, which is great for an alien from the green planet. It looked super cool, but that's not why they did it. Back then, it was relatively easy to copy a videotape. You just needed 2 VCRs. You hooked them together, you push play on one, record on the other, boom, you got yourself a bootleg copy of E.T. And you could probably print a cardboard box that looked a lot like this. You could definitely print up some labels to put on your tape, but you couldn't print a green spool or a green gate. But there were other methods that they used to try to protect this. This movie had macrovision on it, which was a copy guard protection that they were rolling out on other tapes. And this was one of the ones that they absolutely wanted it on. The idea was that if you tried to copy this tape, the screen would go in and out with bright colors and then deep colors. Then it would get dark and then it would strobe and it would make the video absolutely unwatchable. And that wasn't all. They also put a watermark all across both of their labels, and they put a holographic sticker here. And they told people, if your tape doesn't have these features, it's not legit. And no one wanted to buy a less than legit copy at this point. They had waited 6 long years for this. They were going to get the real deal. Now, this sold very, very well. Millions of copies rolled out. The stores couldn't keep it on the shelf. And this proved that home video wouldn't kill the theatrical experience, because people had their chance to see this in the theaters, and they did multiple times, and then they still purchased it. Ownership didn't destroy the magic. E.T. had the record for the most pre-orders of any tape in history. It more than doubled the amount of the number 2 title, which was Cinderella. It went on to sell over 15 million units, which was over $250 million in revenue for the studio. In just that first year, they had already sold 12 million of these. And that meant that it was the highest selling tape of all time. It was also rented over 6 million times at video stores, which was a record that would stand for about a year until Batman came out. And by the end of VHS, E.T. was still towards the top of the charts. Some later movies like Lion King eclipsed it, but at its time, it was number 1. But even after this VHS came out, E.T. continued to reach new audiences through television. The first major network broadcast happened on CBS on November 28, 1991. This was part of the Sears Family Theater. Sears promoted a photograph that you could get with E.T. at their Sears Portrait Studio. And at the end of the movie, there was a whole reading promo that E.T. appeared in. Spielberg's other new film, American Tail, was also promoted, and this Fievel appeared, as did many other big stars. Now, this official broadcast complimented the VHS, but the green tape, this was the true ownership. After the success of E.T., studios began always planning the release of the video cassette before the movie even came out in theaters. The idea was that home ownership was now always going to be part of the consumer experience. E.T. had a few more big moments on VHS. In 1993, Sears promoted a copy that you could purchase for just $2.99 from their catalog. And then in 1996, they re-released this, that time not in the small case, but in the larger clamshell package. Now, when you bought this, you owned E.T. forever on VHS, but VHS didn't last forever. So in the early 2000s, I paid way too much money for this. Look at this beauty. Came with a piece of the actual film of E.T. Now, before this DVD release came out, they re-released the movie to theaters, and they had a big grand promotion. And Steven Spielberg had been listening a little too closely to his friend George Lucas, so they made a couple alterations to the film. The most notable one was that the scene where E.T. first launches off and flies with the bicycles, they removed the guns that the agents had, and they instead gave them walkie-talkies, which they held as if they had the weight of guns and walked around really weird holding them. And it kind of kills the scene, to be honest. The whole reason that E.T. makes the bike fly is because Elliot sees the gun. We get a close-up, and then Elliot closes his eyes because he's so scared, and E.T., who has that homeopathic or telepathic experience with him and can, experience whatever he's thinking, E.T. makes the bike fly to save them because Elliot's worried that he's going to get shot with this gun. Obviously, you're looking at the movie from the perspective of the kid, and so clearly they weren't just about to shoot him off the bicycle, but that's what Elliot thought, and so that's what E.T. believed as well. The scene doesn't work as well without it. Spielberg later relented, and they went back to the original version of the film, and he said he wished he hadn't changed it.
In only 12 more days, E.T. will be gone forever. Soon, your chance to bring home E.T. will vanish. Own E.T.
Well, there you go. 6 years. 6 years of waiting for a little alien with a big heart, but the patience paid off, and we got this in our homes, and we have him in our hearts forever. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one. I really appreciate you guys being here. I'm Guy Hutchinson. I'll be back again with a new adventure for you. I hope you click subscribe so you know about it. Make sure to ring the little bell. If you click that, then you'll know first about these videos. And again, go over there and check out Patreon. Phone home. I'll see you next time.